And welcome to a special edition of the Partyline Talkshow. Joe Delaronde in for Luann, who's, of course, producing the show and is here with us today. Joining us on the panel today is Grand Chief Joseph Norton. We also have Ratsénhaienhs Ross Montour and former Council Chief Peggy Mayo stand-up with us today. I guess everyone's heard the news by now. It certainly is the lead item on the newscasts, the passing of Andrew T. Delisle, the former Grand Chief, and someone who really, when you look at him, had an unprecedented career as someone who bridged the old days and the modern era. And it's actually quite incredible when you think of it, that the man who's sitting here with us, Joseph Norton, actually took over from him back in the early 80s, and there have been only two Grand Chiefs since, and they're the only two who are still with us because now everyone else is gone. It's a very sad time, but also I think it's a chance to celebrate a wonderful life and a brilliant career. And you can say these things sometimes, and you know, you always say nice things about people who've passed on, but Andrew was really an incredible guy, and we'd like to start off by wishing our condolences to his children, grandchildren, friends, and in Ross's case, father-in-law. A tremendous loss for the community and anybody who worked with Andrew, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those. Is going to miss him dearly. So I guess we can start with you, Ross, just because you know you were there, and it's been a tough time for you guys. It's
yeah, it has. The one thing I want to stress and let people know is that Andrew, when his time came, he passed peacefully. He just let his last breath go. And he was in the company of his family, his loved ones. And he leaves behind, you mentioned grandchildren, there are great-grandchildren, I believe even great-great, that he lived to see all of those generations, which is a blessing to him and the love he carried with him as a man.
And as you know, and that's, let's not forget, there's the man and then there's the career. Someone who's seen that career from an early age was our current Grand Chief, Joseph Norton. Joe, you were elected at the tail end of Andrew's career as a council chief. What was it like to work with the man?
Well, I just have to say it's a very emotional time. I need to send condolences to all of his family and if you want to call it kind of like a relationship, it's a community one, and it goes back prior to my ever being elected. I remember as a young kid in the community, a teenager, if you will, 13, 14 years old, there was an excitement in the air every time there was a band meeting at the time, you know, and a bunch of us would go there because we knew the players and the dynamics, and it was Andrew or the late Ronnie Kirby, you know, somebody was going to be on the spot, you know, and there was always a group of people in the community. I won't mention their names. I'll just say they called themselves the Defense Committee, and we'd watch them, we'd listen to them, you know, and the things they said, and we, you know, being young, impressionable, we weren't sure who was wrong or who was right. And it didn't really matter to us at that point in time because we only looked at, you know, who was the evil ones, you know, and who was the good guys and the bad guys. When I did get elected, that changed my whole perspective. I was a young man at the time, 28 years old, when I did get elected, and sitting at the same table with someone whom I wasn't sure about, it suddenly became clear over time where this man's heart and his mind were in terms of the representation, in terms of the people of Kahnawake. And the things that I learned later on was not only Kahnawake, but across the country. I mean, the being involved in the creation of, what is now the Assembly of First Nations, and sitting in, in the James Bay negotiations and all that stuff that went on, and his participation with the Indians of Quebec Associate, all of that, it began to spell out where his heart was and how he wanted to help not only Kahnawake, the Mohawk Nation, or the Haudenosaunee. It was everybody and anybody. And he was known quite extensively all over North America, even in Europe.
And he certainly, even the Queen knew him, because she met with him, and I know some of that was kind of like protocol issues, where it was like, well, they were hoping that he'd just say, "Welcome, Your Majesty," and he actually,
Well, she blew a tire because of his the words that he used, but it was only right what he said,
Yeah. And just to remind people, and Ross, I know you're very familiar about what was it he told the Queen? What was it that he really, it was all about the treatment of, because this is Expo 67 and post Expo 67, where it was all just a big festival and happiness, but the Indians of Canada had the pavilion, and he was the
if I could, the thing is, if you were to ask me what his exact words to the Queen, I'm not privy to that, but what he did, and this is something that people need to know, in Expo 67, he was selected to be the Commissioner General of the what was then the Native Pavilion, the Indians of Canada Pavilion, and he traveled out west, and the chiefs there, they wanted the real history told about Canada's treatment of Indian people, and they were not happy. It was not a happy time. That's a period of time when Harold Cardinal wrote his book, The Unjust Society. A lot of things were beginning to gel. A lot of things were beginning to happen here in Kahnawake and across the nation. And so when she came, the backdrop was that none of the political people out there were really very happy about some of the things that he insisted be part of that pavilion, which told the story. And they didn't even have the words Indian residential school. This is Indian schools, could have been Indian day schools, whatever. And the treatment of our people. And really talking about the taking of our land and how we helped them, we were allies to them, how we fed them, how we taught them to walk in our woods, and all of those things. Now, she, for her part, was very non-committal in her presentation. She usually is. But the message went out loud and clear, and people were not comfortable for it. It was an extremely, for that time, it was a very bold statement to make. And he also, and the other thing, as an artist, I have to make mention too. He introduced the world to a lot of fine native artists. There was a totem pole that was there. There was paintings by Daphne Ojig, Norval Morisseau, Roy Thomas, Daphne Ojig. They were all there, and so people around the world got to see all that. Not only that, he made his presence there, and that pavilion's presence there made an impression on other peoples around the world. And he had many contacts from Africa, from South America, you name it. And across, he had the respect of our peoples across Turtle Island as well.
And it was those Western chiefs who pushed to have him receive the Order of Canada.
Absolutely. And what, when I was looking through, I have here a bag, and I'm not going to pull it out. I just, there was so much. And over the last couple of days, since Andrew's passing, the family has been going through things, and there are papers, newspaper clippings, all of that thing. And to me, which will be an excellent beginning for something which is long overdue, which is the telling of the story of his life. Okay, because he was, as Joe pointed out, as you have pointed out, Joe, he was a transitional figure. He was the right man for the right time, in the right place, at the right age. He was then the youngest man to have been elected to what was the council at that time. And he carried us forward into the next, and yes, and there was all those things going on. But he had, the thing about Andrew was that he had a calm, a dignity, and a way about him. He would not crawl in the mud over anything. He carried himself as a true leader of our people.
I know Peggy's got lots to say, so we'll get to her in a moment. We'll take a short break and be back with more of this special edition of the Party Line, talking about the late, great Andrew T. And we're back with this special edition program paying tribute to Andrew Delisle, who passed away on the weekend at the age of 85. Peggy Mayo, stand up. You go a long way back with Andrew, and we'd like to hear some of your thoughts.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say my condolences to the whole family, his daughters, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren. My memories of Andrew go all the way back to my childhood. When I was a child, I was very young, maybe 5 years old, 6 years old, and I remember him and his father, they used to go on the riverside and they used to sell water, 45-gallon drums of water. And Andrew was on the horse and buggy, and that's what it was. And my Uncle Harry, and my late Uncle Harry was his best friend from all the way back, and he was very good friends with my father. And my late Uncle Alec, they were all friends together, and they would all take turns to go around selling the water. And then in the fall, it was different things that they did. They had ice as well, but mostly it was the water. And then later on, he always was helpful with the people. He once helped my Uncle Harry to start a Christmas tree business during the Christmas season. And he was out there slugging those Christmas trees on his shoulders, running and putting it on the horse and buggy, running, putting it on the horse and buggy. And then my Uncle Harry had a couple of salespeople, young kids, okay? And the worst part of it is they both stuttered. And they couldn't get their prices across. So my Uncle Harry was, of course, having a fit, and he went back and he was yelling at Andrew. So Andrew dropped everything and he hopped on and he went and he sold the Christmas trees. And then they came back, they had nothing left. And those are some of my very happy memories of my childhood with Andrew. He was always part of it. And then as we grew older, later on in life, there was times like he was already on the band council, and I remember this specifically. I was about 12 or 13 at the time. He was on the band council. And there was a lady whose basement flooded, and they only had like a crawl space. It was all mud and you name it. But there was still a place like for a sunk pump, and they didn't have one. So he got called on a Sunday night, and he was all dressed up. And he went to assess the damage, and he seen what it was. So he went to his own house, took his own sunk pump out, and he went back and he put it there, and he came out. He was full of mud from head to toe. And if only we had cameras back then, our phones now with cameras, but we didn't always see was his eyes. And we were all there. We were kids. We were watching this. Anyways, I was totally amazed. And then, obviously, as Joe attests to that, is that it was a time like when there was public meetings, they would go around beating the drums to let people know. And I didn't go at that time. I only started to go when I was about 18. But when elections came and he was elected, and they would drive around, it was a big parade, and he would be in the white convertible with his wife, and the whole town would line up to see the band council. And I mean, I was always so impressed with that, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, even when in later years when I ran for council, we didn't get that. But just no pun intended, just laughing. Those were the days. And then part of it was when in 1967 at the World's Fair, and I remember going there so many times that summer, as we had a bus that used to come to Kahnawake and take a lot of us there, and we didn't even have to pay for it. It was they had provided a bus, I guess, for maybe the less fortunate families, and I was one of the lucky ones, and that bus was filled all the time. I would go at least maybe once a week. We would go there, and we always went to that pavilion, and I was always so amazed because he would always take me in and say, come in and have something to drink, and there was always something. There was snacks, there was sandwiches. Myself and a couple, and his girls as well, and other ones as well. We would all go in, and outside he'd be dressed in his full regalia of everything, and the people that were lined up to take a picture with him was like almost a mile deep. It was you couldn't see the end of the line, and I remember walking through it, and they were pointing it out. There's the Vice President of the United States, and there's the Prime Minister, and they were in line. and other people of very prominent names in line. And I couldn't believe that. How could you? And then, well, of course, now I know. How could you be that popular? Of course he was a popular man. He was well known everywhere. And he was also very much loved. I mean, I loved the man. I loved him, like I would say, like as a father figure. He was a friend. He was a very special friend. He was a mentor. He was a confidant. When I had issues, I always went to him, and he would always calm me down. Once on the band council, I had a fight at the table, and Joe will probably remember that. I had a big argument with a council member. I won't mention no names, but it wasn't Joe, so I never had a fight with Joe. Anyways, I had a big disagreement, and I was very upset. And I went to see him. So he listened, and then he laughed after I said what I had to say. And he said, so now, he said, don't you feel better? Because you said everything you had to say? And then I started to laugh, and I said, yeah, actually, wasn't my argument stupid? And then he said, you said the word, not me. And so anyways, after that, I went back and I apologized for my own behavior. And I felt so much better because he was able to talk you back to normalcy, no matter what the issues were. And I never heard, in all the years, and even in recent years, I've never heard him say a bad word about anyone. Anyone, no one. You know, and the happy things that I could say is that I seen him on Thursday, and I seen him as often as I could from the time he was in the hospital. And on Thursday, when I left, he had the biggest smile on his face. And he told me in Mohawk, he says, very weakly. And I could barely hear it, but I turned and I went back to him and I hugged him. And as I hugged him, he looked at me and he had the biggest smile. And he told me, he says, Peggy, I'm trying so hard to build my strength because I'm going home. I'm going home. Then he told me about the room and everything. And I already knew that because he already had told me before. So when I left there, I just looked at the door. I stopped again, I looked at him, and again, he was just like, he had this biggest smile on his face, and I walked out of there happy. And I knew that the end was coming. I knew that. I mean, obviously, you can see it. And I figured, well, probably by Sunday I'll be back there and spend a couple of hours with him, but that didn't happen. But I do know that Andrew had a very full life, a very wonderful life. A lot of people loved him. A lot of people knew him. He was a good man. And he was so good in bringing our issues to the national front way back from the 1960s in all the what you already have to, I don't have to rehash that, but I can say that he was very prominent in doing so. And I do remember like one specific thing that I found was so profound for me was when he was awarded the Aboriginal Achievement Award that was in Calgary.
The Lifetime Award, yeah.
Lifetime Award that was in 2004. And I remember on the plane going there and talking about it with him and talking about all the things which I already knew and try to put it in your memory bank upstairs and trying to remember everything. And you know something? He had already said what he knew that he would say, and he had it all in. He didn't have to write it. He didn't have to nothing. It was all in his head. Like I always pride myself. I don't have to write it neither. It's in my head, but you need bullet forms to remember. And I just sat there and I watched him, and then afterwards, you know what? I didn't remember one thing that he said because I think I cried during the whole time, and it was happy. It was happy tears, you know, very, very happy. And we had a wonderful time, and over the years we've had a wonderful time, wonderful birthday parties with him. He came to a lot of our events, a lot of parties, and he was just all around a wonderful person. I know he was a wonderful father to his children, to his grandchildren, to everyone. Everyone loved him. They all loved him. And I'm not trying to make him out to be a saint, you know, because we're only human. But all of us were basically all the same. But he was a very good leader. And I am going to miss him in more ways than one.
Thank you, Peggy. One of the things that I find, and I'm old enough now because when we talk about the transition from the old days to the new, one of them, my mother worked at the council office when there were 4 people working there.
Yes.
And there were so few services to the community that it was really difficult to get by. And one of the things he did during his tenure was to create some of the things to with help. I mean, we laugh about the MRA, Mary, Ronnie, and Andrew.
Oh my
and
goodness,
then you have
yes.
Mary who
Yes.
helped so much with the social services aspect to help keep kids here and take care of things like that. But you know, I spoke to him on a great many occasions, and when I asked about the 1960 council he was on, he went through the whole list of names, and he says we'd have our meetings in Kanyageha.
Yeah.
You know, that's how it was back then. And time went on. Well, we lost that. But he came by when he was a young man when he was elected. The St. Lawrence Seaway had just come through, and we had really no say about it. And that's where things changed, and I think that's where we saw some of the things happen that, and no disrespect to anybody who ever served as a leader before, but it was a different era, the right man, as Ross said, the right man at the right time, and things changed, and there are different examples, and I say when we're sitting here right now, this could be a highway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I remember when I got elected in 1978, and following that, the issue of Highway 30 was a major, what would you call it, hot topic. Everybody wanted to build the extension, and they said, you know, that's why you had the traffic circle right out here, and it was supposed to go right through to when you cross over into Chattagee. You see that bridge, you see that was built, and the 4 lanes that are supposed to be there and all of that. And but he, along with the council and the community, took a stance and said, nope, nobody's building anything anymore. You know, we've given up enough land, we've lost enough, and we will not allow this to happen again. And there was a final, let's say, effort by the mayor of Chattagee. I think it was Mayor Bonneau at that time. He came to the council office, sat down, and said, look, is there any chance we can do? He said, nope, that's it, that's all, you know. So he made that very clear. And, you know, I was proud of the fact that I was there at the time and part of the council that said, no, you know, no more development, and not for somebody else's sake.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ross.
I have here, and I read this completely last night because it's from that vintage. This is the Seaway claim, and it's an amazing document to read through historically. Sometimes I think that these things, as time moves along, they recede. But this is an amazing document talking about the history of our people, our stake in our land, in our community, and what happened with the Seaway. And it's a really dramatic story that more people we need to know. This should be taught in the schools, you know, because this is really, I mean, you mentioned the people that came before him and all that. When he came in, my grandfather was still on council. Matty Lazar was on council. It's Constant Albany, or Gus, and Bernard Bova. And so in those days, the Indian agent pretty well ran the town. Everything had to be run through the Indian agent. So the MRA was a way to get around that in the development of what becomes the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. And one of the things that he was particularly involved with was the idea, or committed to, was the idea that we needed to be in control of governing our own affairs. And that's the development of our political life from that period of time. And that's a hugely important thing. If anybody should ever wear the Nike slogan of "Just do it," Andrew was a visionary, and that's what. And he carried that spirit forward, and he came forward in the councils that followed as well.
And also, he was one of the first ones to think outside of the box of the policies and procedures of the Indian agent and their policies regarding housing. And he's the one who came up with the idea of providing housing for the people who were less fortunate, and that was around 1963, 1964. And by the time 1965 came, those houses were being constructed, and the first families moved in 1965 in January, 1966 in January. So he was one of the first ones to get that, and he fought with them. He was going to Ottawa almost every other day. He was fighting with them because the Indian agent in Kahnawake said, nope, absolutely no, you have no right to do that. There are specific dollars, and they're geared for this, and that's it, final. And he said, to hell with that. And he got in his car, and he went straight to Ottawa and started to fight it back and forth. And then in addition to that, he also again fought the Indian agent rules and policies regarding hiring. They wanted to hire specific people, like the snow removal was John Bedard, remember that? It was John Bedard's contract and all that. And his argument was there was competent people here in Kahnawake that had the licenses, that had everything, they had the equipment, so give them the jobs and the contracts. So he fought again with the policies and hired our own people and gave people jobs that otherwise would have never been hired because they had handicaps on the road for people who were the flag people, all the way down to digging the ditches and everything. People that would have never had a chance.
I want to switch gears a little bit here because get into after he had left office, we forget how much work that he did with on the political scene. And one of those times and efforts that I was involved with him was 1990. That's when he actually lost his business and all kinds of things happened. But he sacrificed that in order to help our people. He and I traveled to Europe. We were given a mandate by the 207 Longhouse. We went to Onondaga and we got our passports from Onondaga, and we went. We went to Europe. We traveled to several different countries. We went to The Hague, along with a group of other people from different parts of the country, to make presentations to the not necessarily the World Court, but where the European Parliament sits, and we talked to people over there. We were able to have connections and things set up for us, and he was carrying himself with a lot of dignity, and he really represented us at that time. I was the Grand Chief, but he was known as as a leader, and we went to a variety of different places too, such as the some of the military graveyards where there was Canadian soldiers that were buried. Also, there was Ogohua that were buried there. We performed little ceremonies, and he led the way in doing that. So it was one heck of an experience for me to see those kinds of things and to be able to be involved with such a man. It left a very massive impression on me,
The word dignity. It's funny. I was thinking the same thing when you said that word. That's the thing that comes to my mind is he just carried himself as a leader and a man of great dignity, and he was an ambassador for this community. Yeah. Of course, not everybody always agreed with that. That's the political life that that is Kahnawake. But we'll talk more about Andrew and especially these last several years, because he didn't quit just because he wasn't on council anymore. Yeah. And he wasn't working for the 1990 efforts. He just kept going right till the end. So we'll take a short break and come back with more in just a moment. And we're back with more of the Partyline Talk Show here, special edition, talking about the late, great Andrew Delisle. We have actually a caller on the line. So good afternoon, and who's calling, and what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Joe. It's Mike Rice. I just wanted to acknowledge all of you guys for doing a tremendous show. And Andrew, was really interesting hearing all the history going back all those years ago. Keep up the great work, and what a way to tribute a man who did many things. And I remember meeting him at his old craft store when it was up on the highway. So having a lot of memories thinking about him, but wish everybody all the best and convey my condolences to his family and friends.
Oh, thank you, Mike. He mentioned the store on the at the Oguardi
Oguardi.
Yeah, Oguardi at the Granada Plaza. Yep. And I'll never forget the day of that the fire, which was just a tremendous loss for a lot of people. But
I was doing the talk show at the time, and somebody came in and said, "I think you better go there's a fire at Granada Plaza, and I don't know why, for some reason in my head I thought Plaza 138. And then as I was going down the highway, I saw the column of smoke going up, and it was a really heartbreaking day, because the reconstruction, the reconfiguration of the highway, it was a struggle to keep the business going, and was just starting to come back. Lynn was really devoting a lot of the time. I was running between the Eastern Door with the radio station and Aguardi, and there were things in there that were irreplaceable, things that he had collected over decades in his travels, in his political life. He had artifacts in there, and it wasn't just about selling things. It was about, and you talk about him being an ambassador, and people would come and he would talk to them, and he would tell them our stories, he would tell them our history. In there he had a birch bark, full-size birch bark canoe by the man's name was Cesar. I forget the last name, but well-known canoe maker from Manawan, I believe. Burned in the fire. All of those things. I mean, to go in there afterwards and try, and you don't want to get an utter respect for that, and because they do such a good job anyways, that I still to this day will credit our Kahnawake Fire Brigade for going above and beyond, because that fire was incredible. There's no water infrastructure up there for fire. They had to run hose down to Chateauguay, which is almost a mile, and by then that was like 35-year-old Eastern white cedar, so it went like paper. But it was a very dramatic event, and it's a change of our landscape, and so much has changed since then. But that was his, that was his private life away from, and yet he still carried who he was with there. In there, I always remember, and you know what? Talk about luckily. He received the Lifetime Aboriginal Achievement Award, but he wore his Officer of the Order of Canada thing, and it used to be hanging over the door. And had he not taken it, it probably would have been gone in a fire as well.
I just
dramatic
remember that.
Times.
It was dramatic, and I remember talking to him then, and he was just heartbroken. But, he was a resilient man. He was very resilient. A lot of challenges. Everybody has challenges in their lives. He certainly did. Did the political game, came back in 1990 and helped there. And like you said, Joe, he traveled extensively and he came back actually later on to work as an elder advisor for the Mohawk Council, which was where I got to spend so much time with him, especially like this time of the year in the summer when things might have quieted down. Him and I would just talk, have a couple of games of golf here and there, and just an incredible man. But he kept going, and then still was doing things. He was working on forming a National Indigenous Council of Elders.
It's called the acronym is NICE.
Yeah.
It was National Indigenous Council of Elders, and he brought that back, that involvement, and I think that's Joe, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's sort of the genesis of the Business Association, because they were the first meetings that were held. I mean, because they were all about our economic independence and need for that.
Yeah, I sat on that committee. I was considered an elder at the time. I was 64 or 65, something like that. And as a matter of fact, I got a call from one of the founding members yesterday asking if I had any objection to them formally talking to the Assembly of First Nations, because next week there's a General Assembly in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And they wanted to form something anyway to have an honoring of his passing next week in New Brunswick. So I said, yeah, sure, go right ahead. Let me know what I can do to help out. Several things I wanted to mention. One of them was what was mentioned earlier about Expo 67 and the Queen. I was there as a young man. We had a lacrosse team. We put on a demonstration sport. And I didn't hear anything, but we saw when Andrew was talking with the Queen and all of that. But it was quite an experience. The other thing is the National Aboriginal Achievement Awards, I'm proud to say, I was his nominator.
Yeah.
And I worked with his family to, to get him nominated and give all the information that was necessary.
And he also nominated you this last time.
Yeah.
As what was maybe his last political act, when you think of it. Joining us on the line is Franklin Williams, a man that we all know and certainly has spent time with Andrew. Hi, Franklin. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon. I joined the program a little late, but I just want to extend my deepest condolences to Andrew's family. And I just want to mention, of course, as you know, Andrew and I have been friends. I've always had the deepest respect for him. One thing, I don't know if it was mentioned, but the pension plan that we all enjoy today, which is a real successful plan, Andrew had started that, had the federal government make that commitment before he left office there from 78 to 80. And, of course, administratively, we took it and managed it. But it was his efforts to, among the many benefits he gave to the community. So I just felt that should be mentioned, and again, it's nice to hear he's being honored by all the people in the community because he did a lot of good, and a lot of it was unsung. Anyway, Nyalgoa.
Oh, thanks so much. Nyalgoa. Franklin Williams, of course, was also on council with you, Joe, and Peggy. I think you were on council at the same time.
No,
I'm not sure.
he was already gone when I got there.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the influence of him on your career, because when you look at some of the things you do today, the way you carry yourself, so to speak, obviously there was some connection there.
Well, you have to look at it from this point of view, and earlier on the discussions centered around the battling and the fight that he put up to take control of, what happens in our community, fighting the Indian agent, fighting. All of that had taken place not long before I was elected. Mm-hmm. And the even doing away with the sections in order to say we represent everybody. We're not just in pockets of support. Everybody was there for all those that got elected were there to represent all the community members. But I know one of the things that he said was basically we have to take control of whatever we're doing here. And that was education. That was the, Peggy, you talked about,
housing.
Not only housing, but Jean Bedard, and the work that they were doing in the community, that we've taken that under our control. The water and sewer system that was controlled basically by Department of Indian Affairs, put our own people to work, and how we do all that kind of, all the things that we see now were as a result of his initiatives. He says we have to be in control. So for me, I always remembered that always stuck in my mind, take control. And it always stuck in my mind, he says, economic development. He says we have to have the funds, the monies in order to operate. Otherwise, we're going to always find ourselves being a victim of the government or provincial or federal governments, he said. So we do our best to create, he says, and to help our individual people also to develop their own business opportunities. He says we assist them. And then basically how to carry yourself when you meet with officials, federal officials and whatever, or even other First Nations leaders, He didn't show me he didn't tell me this is the way you do it, but just by watching him, listening to him, and the things that he said. So that was really building blocks for myself on how I developed over the years, just carried his work forward and upward all the time.
We only have a couple of minutes left. Peggy, if you have...
For me, what he taught me was basically always think of our fellow man, always, and always remember where we came from, and never forget who we are, and that we're all together as Unguhua to help one another. And being on council and with him being the political advisor, as you know yourself, I spent many hours with him when I had, like if you're not sure of an issue and you don't know the history back to the 50s or the 40s, I would go sit with him and ask him, well, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And how can we prevent this? So it was always through a good mind, know your issue, and know exactly where you're going, and always dignify yourself. That's his legacy to me.
Ross?
Yep.
Anything is possible, so long as you believe it and act on your beliefs. Andrew, to me, was a friend, a mentor, and way more than a father-in-law. And I'll carry his example with me the best I know how.
All right. Ross Montour, Peggy Mayo, stand up. Joseph Tetewathá Norton, Nyauko for spending the time here this afternoon on a very emotional day, emotional time for many of us here in Kahnawake. I'd like to thank our producer, Luann Stacy, for her work today, and thanks to the people who called in. And very much appreciated. Don't forget the wake is going to be starting.
He's there now. He came at 11. Please come by because he's walking in dignity even now. And the mass at the church will take place at 11 a.m. on Thursday, and there will be a dinner at the Golden Age after that. And the last thing, just quickly, because we left out his involvement, and one of the last things was the Kanien'kehá:ka Funding Association.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, his philanthropical work continues. So his memory will live on for a long time. Well, thanks everybody for listening in. Before we leave, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I just want to say, and I don't usually do this kind of thing, but it's my wife's last day of work today, retiring after 45 years as a nurse. So today's her last day.
Wendy, on your last day, enjoy.
Congratulations.
Good for you.
Yeah. So I just want to say, way to go. All right. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.
Yeah.